Take a moment to imagine a peninsula jutting into the Atlantic like a crooked finger pointing at Cuba. A landmass so flat you could roll a marble from Orlando to Miami, and it would barely deviate. A state that, geologically speaking, is little more than a limestone shelf wearing a thin toupee of sand and swamp grass. In 1900, Florida ranked 32nd in population among the then 45 states. Today, it is the third most populous state in the Union, home to more than 22 million people. And here is the thing. Florida should not exist as we know it. It has no coal, no iron, no deep harbors worthy of the name, no mountains, no rivers of consequence. What it does have is sunshine, humidity that feels like a wet towel wrapped around your face, and more alligators than any reasonable place should tolerate. Yet in the span of a single human lifetime, this bug-infested afterthought became the economic and cultural juggernaut of the American South. The question is not whether Florida is unusual. The question is how a place dismissed by early American settlers as uninhabitable wasteland became the fourth largest economy in the nation, surpassing economic powerhouses like South Korea if it were an independent country. How did a state with no natural resources except heat and sand become the beating heart of 21st century migration and innovation? The answer lies in a series of inventions, political maneuvers, and sheer geographic audacity that turned a swamp into a paradise, or at least convinced millions of people it was. To understand Florida, you must first understand that the entire state is an engineering fiction. The bedrock beneath your feet, that porous honeycomb of limestone, is not solid ground. It is more like a sponge. Rain falls. Water does not run off into rivers the way it does in normal places. Instead, it seeps down into the aquifer, that massive underground reservoir that holds more fresh water than all the Great Lakes combined. The Everglades, that river of grass stretching from Lake Okeechobee to the tip of the peninsula, was not a swamp in the traditional sense. It was a slow-moving sheet of water, 60 miles wide and 6 inches deep, creeping southward at a pace you could barely perceive. For thousands of years, this was the natural state of affairs. Then came the dreamers and the schemers. In the late 1800s, a Philadelphia industrialist named Hamilton Dyston bought 4 million acres of swampland for $1 an acre. He dredged canals, built levees, tried to drain the Everglades, and failed spectacularly. But he set a precedent. Florida was not something you lived with. It was something you conquered. By the 1920s, the Army Corps of Engineers got involved. They carved the landscape into a grid of canals, dikes, and water control structures. They turned the Kissimmee River, a winding 100-mile ribbon of water, into a 52-mile ditch. They built the Herbert Hoover Dike around Lake Okeechobee, a massive levee designed to prevent the catastrophic floods that had killed thousands. The result? You could now build on land that a generation earlier was underwater half the year. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach. These cities exist because engineers moved an entire ecosystem out of the way. And Florida's geography, a massive pier stretching into 2 bodies of water, the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, made it the perfect staging ground for trade with Latin America and the Caribbean. But draining the swamp was only half the battle. For most of American history, Florida was the South, the Deep South, plantations, Jim Crow, citrus groves, and cattle ranches. As late as 1950, the population hovered around 2.5 million. Then 2 things happened that changed everything. The first was air conditioning. Not the window unit your grandmother had, but real central air conditioning, the kind that could cool an entire building and make living in a subtropical hellscape not just tolerable, but comfortable. Willis Carrier invented the modern air conditioner in 1902, but it took decades for the technology to become affordable and widespread. By the 1950s and 60s, air conditioning was everywhere. Suddenly, you did not have to suffer through summers where the humidity made your shirt cling to your back like plastic wrap. You could live in Florida year-round and not lose your mind. The second revolution was infrastructure. The Interstate Highway Act of 1956, signed by Eisenhower, unleashed billions of dollars to build high-speed highways across the nation. Interstate 75 sliced down from Michigan through Georgia into Florida. Interstate 95 ran the entire eastern seaboard, connecting New York to Miami. These highways did not just make travel easier, they made Florida accessible. You could drive from Ohio to Orlando in a day. People did, millions of them. But the real inflection point, the moment Florida transcended its status as a vacation spot and became a destination, was when a man named Walt Disney bought 43 square miles of swampland near Orlando in 1965. He did it through shell companies to keep the price down. He negotiated with the state legislature to create the Reedy Creek Improvement District, a legal entity that gave Disney near sovereign control over the land. Disney World was not just a theme park. It was a city-state with its own fire department, its own building codes, its own municipal bonds. When it opened in 1971, it became the economic engine of Central Florida. Entire towns sprang up to service the park. Hotels, restaurants, housing developments. Disney did not just build an attraction. It built a reason for people to stay. And stay they did. If you want to understand the modern Florida boom, start with a number. 1,000 people per day. That is the average number of new residents moving to Florida every single day for the past decade. Not vacationers, not snowbirds who flee back north when summer arrives. Permanent residents. Where are they coming from? New York, New Jersey, Illinois, California. High-tax states where the cost of living has spiraled out of control. Florida has no state income tax. If you are a retiree with a pension or a high earner with capital gains, that difference is measured in tens of thousands of dollars per year. The result has been a wealth transfer of staggering proportions. Estimates suggest that more than $1 trillion in adjusted gross income has relocated to Florida over the past 2 decades. $1 trillion. To put that in perspective, that is more than the GDP of Australia. Florida's economy, measured at around $1.7 trillion, would rank as the 16th largest economy on Earth if it were an independent nation. Larger than Indonesia, larger than Mexico, larger than the Netherlands. The state has more Fortune 500 headquarters than all but 3 states. It is home to the busiest cruise port in the world, Port Miami, which handles more than 7 million passengers annually. It is the second largest producer of oranges on the planet after Brazil. And in recent years, it has become a magnet for technology companies fleeing Silicon Valley. Hedge funds have relocated from Greenwich, Connecticut to Palm Beach. Private equity firms have set up shop in Miami. Tech startups have clustered in Tampa and Fort Lauderdale. Why? Taxes, yes, but also talent. When you can recruit someone by offering them a life where they can kayak before work and never shovel snow, the pitch writes itself. Florida has also become the laboratory for the future of space exploration. Cape Canaveral, once the exclusive domain of NASA, is now home to SpaceX, Blue Origin, and a constellation of private aerospace companies. When a Falcon 9 rocket roars into orbit, the sound echoes across the Space Coast like thunder. The state is no longer just a place people go to retire. It is a place people go to build. But Florida does not behave like the rest of America. It never has. Start with insurance. Homeowners insurance in Florida is in crisis. Premiums have skyrocketed. Major insurers have fled the state entirely, unwilling to shoulder the risk of hurricanes, flooding, and a legal environment that allows rampant litigation over claims. The state-backed insurer of last resort, Citizens Property Insurance, now covers more than 1 million policies. If a Category 5 hurricane hits Miami, the financial fallout would be catastrophic, not just for Florida, but for the national economy. Then there is the water. Sea levels are rising, not in some distant hypothetical future. Now, Miami Beach has installed pumps to keep seawater from flooding the streets during high tide. The porous limestone that makes up the bedrock means you cannot just build a seawall and call it a day. Water seeps up from below. Entire neighborhoods, particularly in South Florida, are at risk. Property values in flood-prone areas have started to decline, a warning sign that the market is beginning to price in the reality of climate change. And yet, construction continues unabated. High rises shoot up along the coast. New developments sprawl inland. The political landscape is equally volatile. Florida is a state where retirees who vote Republican live alongside young professionals who lean Democrat, alongside Cuban exiles who fled socialism, alongside Puerto Ricans who arrived after Hurricane Maria, alongside transplants from Venezuela, Colombia, and Brazil. It is a microcosm of America, but under a heat lamp, accelerated and intensified. Politically, it has swung from purple to red in recent years, but demographics are destiny, and no one knows what Florida will look like in 20 years. So what is Florida? A miracle or a mirage? A glimpse into the future or a cautionary tale? It is a state built on an act of defiance against nature, a place where human ambition carved cities out of wetlands and convinced millions of people that living on a hurricane-prone, flood-vulnerable, ecologically fragile limestone shelf was not just viable, but desirable. It is the American dream on steroids, a place where anyone can reinvent themselves, where the weather is warm and the taxes are low. But it is also a state on the edge, literally and figuratively. Rising seas lap at its shores. Insurance companies pack their bags. Hurricanes grow stronger. And yet, people keep coming. 1,000 a day. Maybe Florida is not an aberration. Maybe it is the future, a vision of what happens when a society decides that growth, at any cost, is the only path forward. Or maybe it is a fever dream built on sand, and eventually we all wake up.